Peace on Earth. Ethan Indigo Smith here. Sacred Geometry of Plato, Part 2 of the Republic. Again, inspired to do this by Nick's at the Occult Rejects, great videos on Plato and all his great work. As I was preparing to talk on a discussion about Plato, I was rereading certain works and I started looking at it more of course there is many mention of geometry and inference of sacred geometry in Plato's writings. However, I started looking at it really obtusely with the formation of my four phase geometry comprehension in correspondence with the four dimensions of geometry. Point, line, plane, solid, or concentration, connection, circulation, unity, expansion. And some of the language within Plato's works really started to strike me that inferred meditation from geometry and also actually inferred some of the lessons of the four dimensions of sacred geometry. In essence, the last kind of video that I did, one of the essences of it is as follows. So that tendency, we affirm, is to be found in all studies that force the soul to turn its vision round to the region where dwells the most blessed part of reality, which it is imperative that it should behold. Of course, you turn your eyes around, that's meditation, look inward, right? You are right, he said. Then if it compels the soul to contemplate essence, it is suitable. If Genesis, it is not. So we affirm. This, at least, said I, will not be disputed by those who have even a slight acquaintance with geometry, that this science is in direct contradiction with the language employed in it by its adepts. How so? He said. Language is most ludicrous, though they cannot help it, for they speak as if they were doing something and as if all their words were directed towards action. For all their talk is of squaring and applying and adding and the like. Whereas, in fact, the real object of the entire study is pure knowledge. So that's the internal geometry, the esoteric geometry, as opposed to the external or exoteric geometry. Now, today I'm going to break down the divided line in essentially it's a fourfold dynamic of consciousness. But I think to understand it, I think it helps to understand not necessarily what we went over last episode where I covered the tetractys and the tetragrammaton, but another related idea is the four worlds. The four worlds, there's different ways that it's vocalized often enough. But the four worlds of the Kabbalah are essentially the four worlds of consciousness and creation. So if we see here that we do have correspondence in the tetragrammaton, which is on the right, the Hebrew words there, and they make up a symbol that is very much like a human. We have the head, have two arms, body, two legs. This is one correspondence that's often shared, but it's also the four worlds are essentially, I like to vocalize it or understand it as emanation, formation, fabrication, action. although again, there's different subtleties that might refine one's understanding of this. We see also that the four worlds correspond with the four elements and the four symbolic colors of alchemy. And these, of course, correspond with the Native American colors of the four peoples. So I think it's helpful to understand the four worlds of Kabbalah and the idea that everything emanates from a spiritual realm that we can't really fathom. Um, and it is, even though it's the hardest to understand, uh, it is the most real. Similar, similar comprehension, similar idea to what's going on with the line here. So, and of course, points, lines, planes, and solids is geometry. So the divided line is obviously geometrical, and it is geometrical in the formation of a duality of polarity. You have your four aspects of a twofold division. Of course, we see here the twofold division is the visible realm and the intellectual realm, and then you have the reality and reflections off of that in both formations, essentially. And in one way or another, this is actually both sacred geometry and sacred algebra, because algebra means unifying of parts. Mending broken bones is actually a big part of its etymology, and mending of broken parts, the unity of these different aspects, um, is is a important way to expand consciousness. Each one of these is an important way to understand creation and ourselves. So I'll begin the reading here. This is extracts of book 6, which brings together the metaphor of the sun and the divided line right before the allegory of the cave. So I extracted these parts as I felt that they were helpful to explain the duality of the real light and the philosophical light, and the false, if you will, the reflections. Let us suppose that philosophical minds always love knowledge of a sort which shows them the eternal nature, not varying from generation and corruption. Agreed. And further, I said, let us agree that they are lovers of all true being. There is no part, whether greater or more or less honorable, which they are willing to renounce, as we said before of the lover and the man of ambition. True. And if they are to be what we are describing, is there not another quality which they should also possess? What quality? Truthfulness. They will never intentionally receive into their mind falsehood, which is their detestation, and they will love the truth. Yes, that may be safely affirmed of them. Maybe, my friend, I replied, is not the word. Say rather, must be affirmed. For he whose nature is of anything cannot help loving all that belongs or is akin to the object of his affections. Right, he said. And is there anything more akin to wisdom than truth? How can there be? Can the same nature be a lover of wisdom and a lover of falsehood? Never. And the true lover of learning then must, from his earliest, as far as in him lies, desire all truth, assuredly. But then again, as we know by experience, he whose desires are strong in one direction will have them weaker in others. They will be like a stream which has been drawn off into another channel. True. He whose desires are drawn towards knowledge in every form will be absorbed in the pleasures of the soul and will hardly feel bodily pleasure. I mean, if he be a true philosopher and not a sham one. And this, to me, beckons certain parallels of modern day teachers or philosophers or gurus. A lot of people are sham gurus, sham teachers. There's not that many sham physics teachers, but there's a lot of sham gurus who are bringing you outside in the ridiculousness, not the internal, um, eternal and internal comprehension. That is most certain. Such a one is sure to be temperate and the reverse of covetous, for the motives which make another man desirous of having and spending have no place in his character. Very true. Another criterion of the philosophical nature has also to be considered. What is that? There should be no secret corner of illiberality. Nothing can be more antagonistic than meanness to a soul which is ever longing after the whole of things both divine and human. Most true, he replied. Then how can he who has magnificence of mind and is the spectator of all time and all existence think much of human life? He cannot. Or can such a one account death fearful? No, indeed. Then the cowardly and mean nature has no part in true philosophy. Certainly not. Or again, can he who is harmoniously constituted, who is not covetous or mean or a boaster or a coward, can he, I say, ever be unjust or hard in his dealings? Impossible. Then you will soon observe whether a man is just and gentle or rude and unsociable. These are the signs which distinguish, even in youth, the philosophical nature from the unphilosophical. And I'll pause there. This reminds me of interaction that the Buddha is said to have had with a person as he was traveling along. And essentially, it goes something like, "What have you gained from meditation?" And the Buddha says, "I've gained nothing." And the man says, "Ha, I knew it. It's not worth a thing." And Buddha says something to the effect of, "You're right, I have gained nothing, but I have lost the fear of death and animosity and angry thoughts and scattered, fragmented being." And he keeps walking, and the man is left stunned, because who doesn't want to lose these things? There is another point which should be remarked. What point? Whether he has or has not a pleasure in learning, for no one will love that which gives him pain, and in which, after much toil, he makes little progress. Certainly not. And again, if he is forgetful and retains nothing of what he learns, will he not be an empty vessel? That is certain. And that's a powerful thought, of course, because there's the Zen thought that you need to be emptied of all these fragmentations and distractions. And also there is the chi understanding that you must retain your essence, your memories, your thoughts, in an unleaking container, right? So it kind of reminds me of these two lessons. Laboring in vain, he must end in hating himself and his fruitless occupation. Yes. Then a soul which forgets cannot be ranked among genuine philosophical natures. We must insist that the philosopher should have a good memory. Certainly. And once more, the inharmonious and unseemly nature can only tend to disproportion, undoubtedly. And do you consider truth to be akin to proportion or to disproportion? To proportion. And of course, this again goes to the idea, the sacred geometry of reflections in multitudes. I can't think of the term right now, but the original sacred geometry from 30 years ago, where they would use the picture that had the same dynamic within it ad infinitum. And I can't remember the term. Forgive me. I had it earlier. Continuing. And do you consider truth to be, then besides other qualities, we must try to find a naturally well proportioned and gracious mind. Wow. That reminds me of a Milarepa song. I have to look that up. Then, besides other qualities, we must try to find a naturally well proportioned and gracious mind, which will move spontaneously towards the true being of everything, certainly. Well, and do not all these qualities, which we have been enumerating, go together? And are they not, in a manner, necessary to a soul, which is to have a full and perfect participation of being? They are absolutely necessary, he replied. And must not that be a blameless study, which he can only pursue, what he only can pursue who has the gift of a good memory and is quick to learn, noble, gracious, the friend of truth, justice, courage, temperaments, who are his kindred. The God of jealousy himself, he said, could find no fault in such a study. Yeah, meditation is one of the most blameless studies and practices. And also, the gift of a good memory is engaged by employing practices that require memory. So don't give up if you think you don't have a good memory. It's something that is practiced. And to men like him, I said, when perfected by years and education, and to these only you will entrust the state. And of course, now I'm skipping ahead here, but of course, the state in the Republic can be understood as an allegory for the mind. Of course, the external and the exoteric is symbolic for the internal and the esoteric, as I've underlined here in these quotes. And so this skips ahead here. And there is an absolute beauty and an absolute good. And of other things to which the term many is applied, there is an absolute. for they may be brought under a single idea, which is called the very essence of each. And this reminds me of all life having a similar or same spark of life and a dissimilar connection to the universe. A cockroach has a dissimilar connection than a human being, but the spark is the same. My my theory and deduction. Very true. The many, as we say, are seen but not known, and the ideas are known but not seen. Exactly. And what is the organ with which we see the visible things? The sight, he said. And with the hearing, I said we hear. And with the other senses, perceive the other objects of sense. True. But what have you remarked that sight is by far the most costly and complex piece of workmanship which the artificer of the senses ever contrived? And, just to interject on myself here in the reading, when I see sight and hearing together, I have to think of the consciousness parable or adage of the wise monkeys: hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil, and of course the fourth, fear no evil. And those can be kind of taken in a lesson of a higher mind and a lower mind, as can the understanding of the divided line. It can be understood as direct information from the sun, and it can also be understood as cultural cultural lessons that are diluted of reality and value. So to repeat the last part. But have you remarked that sight is by far the most costly and complex piece of workmanship which the artificer of the senses ever contrived? No, I never have, he said. Then reflect. Has the ear or voice need of any third or additional nature in order that the one may be able to hear and the other to be heard? Nothing of the sort. No, no, indeed, I replied, and the same is true of most, if not all, the other senses. You would not say that any of them requires such an addition. Certainly not. But you see that without the addition of some other nature, there is no seeing or being seen. How do you mean? Sight being, as I conceive, in the eyes, and he who has eyes wanting to see, color being also present in them, still, unless there be a third nature specially adapted to the purpose, the owner of the eyes will see nothing, and the colors will be invisible. Of what nature are you speaking? Of that which you term light, I replied. True. Noble then is the bond which links together sight and visibility, and great beyond other bonds by no small difference of nature, for light is their bond, and light is no ignoble thing. Nay, he said, the reverse of ignoble. And which, I said, of the gods in heaven would you say was the lord of this element, whose is the light which makes the eye to see perfectly and the visible to appear? You mean the sun, you and all mankind say? May not the relation of sight to this deity be described as follows? How? Neither sight nor the eye in which sight resides is the sun. No. Yet all Yet of all the organs of scent, the eye is most like the sun, by far the most like. And the power which the eye possesses is a sort of effluence which is dispensed from the sun. Exactly. Then the sun is not sight, but the author of sight, who is recognized by sight. True, he said. And this is he whom I call the child of the good, whom the good begat in his own likeness, to be in the visible world, in relation to sight and the things of sight, what the good is in the intellectual world in relation to mind and the things of mind. Will you be a little more explicit? He said. Why, I said that the eyes, when a person directs them towards objects on which the light of day is no longer shining, but the moon and stars only, see dimly and are nearly blind. They seem to have no clearness of vision in them. Very true. But when they are directed towards objects on which the sun shines, they see clearly, and there is sight in them. Certainly. And the soul is like the eye. When resting upon that on which truth and being shine, the truth perceives and understands and is radiant with intelligence. But when turned towards the twilight of becoming and perishing, then she has opinion only and goes blinking about and is first of one opinion and then of another and seems to have no intelligence. Just so. Now, that which imparts truth to the known and the power of knowing to the knower is what I would have you term the idea of good. And will this you will deem to be the cause of science and of truth, insofar as the latter becomes the subject of knowledge. Beautiful too, as are both truth and knowledge, you will be right in esteeming this other nature as more beautiful than either. And in the previous instance, light and sight may be truly said to be like the sun, and yet not to be the sun. So in this other sphere, science and truth may be deemed to be like the good, but not the good. The good has a place of honor, yet higher. What a wonder of beauty that must be, he said, which is the author of science and truth, and yet surpasses them in beauty. For you surely cannot mean to say that pleasure is the good. God forbid, I replied. But may I ask you to consider the image in another point of view? In what point of view? You would say, would you not, that the sun is not only the author of visibility in all visible things, but of generation and nourishment and growth, though he himself is not generation? Certainly. In like manner, the good may be said to be not only the author of knowledge to all things known, but of their being and essence. And yet the good is not essence, but far exceeds essence in dignity and power. Glaucon said with a ludicrous earnestness, "By the light of heaven, how amazing!" Yes, I said, and the exaggeration may be set down for you, for you made me utter my fancies. And pray continue to utter them. At any rate, let us hear if there is anything more to be said about the similitude of the sun. Yes, I said, there is a great deal more. Then omit nothing, however slight. I will do my best, I said, but I should think that there is a great deal will have to be omitted. I hope not, he said. You have to imagine then that there are two ruling powers, and that one of them is set over the intellectual world, the other over the visible. I do not say heaven, lest you should fancy that I am playing upon the name, or Hanzas or Hatzos. May I suppose that you have this distinction of the visible and intelligible fixed in your mind? I have. Now take a line which has been cut into two unequal parts and divide each of them again in the same proportion. And suppose the two main divisions to answer, one to the visible and the other to the intelligible, and then compare the subdivisions in respect of their clearness and want of clearness. And you will find that the first section in the sphere of the visible consists of images. And by images, I mean, in the first place, shadows, and in the second place, reflections in water and in solid, smooth, and polished bodies. And like, do you understand? Yes, I understand. Imagine now the other section of which this is only the resemblance, to include the animals which we see and everything that grows or is made. Very good. Would you not admit that both the sections of this division have very different degrees of truth, and that the copy is to the original as the sphere of opinion is to the sphere of knowledge? Spheres and superficies and lines and monads, these are absolutely related to geometry understanding and the internal geometry, the energetic geometry of a sphere of cognition, right? So it's interesting that all of a sudden these spheres are back in the thing when we're back into the discussion when we're talking about lines. Next, proceed to consider the manner in which the sphere of the intellectual is to be divided. In what manner? Thus, there are two subdivisions, in the lower of which the soul uses the figures given by the former division as images. The inquiry can only be hypothetical, and instead of going upwards to a principle, descends to the other end. In the higher of the two, the soul passes out of hypothesis and goes up to a principle which is above hypotheses, making no use of images as in the former case, but proceeding only in and through the ideas themselves. I do not quite understand your meaning, he said. Then I will try again. You will understand me better when I have made some preliminary remarks. You are aware that students of geometry, arithmetic, you are aware that students of geometry, arithmetic, and the kindred sciences assume the odd and the even and the figures of three kinds of angels and the like in their several branches of science. These are their species, which they and every body are supposed to know, and therefore they do not deign to give any account of them, either to themselves, but they begin with them and go on until they arrive at last and in consistent manner at their conclusion. Yes, he said, I know. And do you not know also that although they make use of the visible forms and reason about them, they are thinking not of these ideals which they resemble, not of the figures which they draw, but of absolute square and the absolute diameter, and so on. The forms which they draw or make, and which have shadows and reflections in water of their own, are converted by them into images, but they are really seeking to behold the things themselves, which can only be seen with the eye of the mind. That is true. And of this kind, I spoke as the intelligible, although in the search after it is the soul is compelled to use hypotheses, not ascending to a first principle, because she is unable to rise above the region of hypothesis, but employing the objects of which the shadows below are resemblances in their turn as images, they having in relation to the shadows and reflection of them a greater distinctness of, and therefore a higher value. I understand, he said, that you are speaking of the province of geometry and the sister arts. And when I speak of the other division of the intelligible, you will understand me to speak of that other sort of knowledge which reason herself attains by the power of dialectic, using the hypotheses not as first principles, but only as hypotheses. That is to say, as steps and points of departure into a world which is above hypotheses, in order that she may soar beyond them to the first principle of the whole, and clinging to this, and then to that which depends on this, by successive steps, she descends again without the aid of any sensible object from ideas through ideas, and in ideas she ends. I understand you, he replied, not perfectly, for you seem to me to be describing a task which is really tremendous. Meditation, mindfulness. But at any rate, I understand you to say the knowledge and being which the science of dialectic contemplates, contemplation, another word for meditation, a more accurate word for meditation, often of meditation practices from the East. But at any rate, I understand you to say that knowledge and being, which the science of dialectic contemplates, are clearer than the notions of the arts, as they are termed, which proceed from hypotheses only. These are also contemplated by the understanding and not by the senses. The understanding and not by the senses. The inner standing and not by the senses, one could also say. Yet because they start from hypotheses and do not ascend to a principle, those who contemplate them appear to you not to exercise the higher reason upon them, although when a first principle is added to them, they are cognizable by a higher reason. and the habit, which is concerned with geometry and the cognate sciences, I suppose that you would term understanding and not reason as being intermediate between opinion and reason. You have quite conceived my meaning, I said. And now, corresponding to these four divisions, let there be four faculties in the soul: reason answering to the highest, understanding to the second, faith or conviction to the third, and perception of shadows to the last. And let there be a scale of them. And let us suppose that the several faculties have clearness in the same degree that their objects have truth. I understand, he replied, and give my assent and accept your arrangement. That's the end of book 6. And next begins the allegory of the cave, which I'll get into next time because this has gone on longer than I expected. But there's a fourfold dynamic to consciousness, just as there is a fourfold dynamic to meditation practices in correspondence with geometry. Geometry helps us understand the external world, and sacred geometry, internal esoteric geometry lessons, help us understand the internal. And both of these have tremendous benefit, of course. I hope this inspires you to check out my book and look at sacred geometry of mind, not just visual. And the word I forgot, of course, is fractal, the fractal art. And it came to me as I was reading. So, peace on earth. Book links and website link below. Thank you.